mentally as well, and so I had very little headspace for anything really, and so reading, it just didn't really happen. I was not feeling like it, so I didn't really do much. Also, what I was reading kind of took a lot of time. I did start another book in October, but I finished it in November, so I can't talk about it yet. Oh, by the way, please subscribe if you haven't yet. Today, I want to talk to you about the fact that I read The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I loved it. Okay, this is for all the Lord of the Rings nerds. Come here, come here, come here. I bought the box set of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings a couple weeks ago. I made a vlog about that on my vlog channel. I've also talked about this multiple times now on my vlog channel. But I watched the movies when I was really young. I didn't remember much of it. And then in June I went to Geneva with to visit my cousin and his wife. I also made a vlog about that. And we watched the Lord of the Rings movies in the evenings, and they were such huge fans that their joy when talking about it was just aanstekelijk, contagious. Is that the word? I'm not really sure. It was very motivating and inspiring to see them so happy and filled with just, I don't know, nerdy joy. I remember watching The Hunger Games and reading the books and feeling very similarly. That's like Hobbit, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. And this is a fantasy book, by the way. The Hobbit is written in a way where it's meant to be read out loud to children. That's kind of how this whole thing, like world famous trilogy saga started. And you can really tell the writing in this is very different compared to the Lord of the Rings books. But so, I don't know. I'm not the biggest fantasy reader, but I love good world building and an immersive story. And, you know, I knew that I liked The Lord of the Rings, so I kind of already knew that I would like this going into it, but the writing was something that I needed to get used to, just because it just felt very different to what I'd read before. Should I read the first page? I know that Katie Alice ASMR has a video where she reads this in ASMR, and that was very funny because she uploaded that the first week that I started reading The Hobbit. And so, after I'd read the first couple chapters, I would listen to her ASMR video. Shout out, I love your videos. But so that was very funny and meant to be. Chapter 1, An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down or eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with paneled walls, and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these. Wardrobes. He had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows, looking over his garden and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. The hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. So, immediately as I'm reading it out loud, it feels a lot more comfortable to read it out loud than it does to just read it on your own. That might not make sense, but to me it does. It just took me a little bit to get into the writing. So, you know, Bilbo is in his little hobbit hole, and then Gandalf comes by, and he kind of is like, do you want to go on an adventure? And Baggins is like, no thanks. And then all these dwarves show up at his doorstep, and they kind of seem to plunder his house almost. And they eat a lot of food. Both the dwarves and the hobbits have that in common. But the dwarves, like, they enter his house and make themselves very much at home and start grabbing all his stuff and making the food, and it's very chaotic, and Bilbo isn't really setting boundaries or anything either. He's like, oh my god, what's happening? And then he hears about this plan that they have, and he is invited as a burglar. And Baggins is, he is not really a burglar, and the whole time it's a little bit confusing to him as to why he is invited. But Gandalf just has this trust and faith, this feeling of like, you are meant to be on this journey. You have a lot more up your sleeve than, and you're capable of a lot more than you think. And so he decides to join them on the journey. They want to go on this quest to claim back the it's very quirky, and also just, you know, very immersive. It is still fantasy. The world building is still amazing, and yeah, I don't know. I really loved it. I can't separate it from the Lord of the Rings books and movies in my brain, so I find it really hard to explain this. But I feel like if you like fantasy and you've had even the smallest bit of desire to get started on these books, I could not recommend it more. Oh my god, I'm 25 and I finally get the hype. I think that both the movies and the books on their own are amazing, but the combination, because the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that after I finished this book, I watched all the movies, the Hobbit movies, twice. I rented the DVDs from my library, and so I just started watching them. And the way that I did this, I would actually really recommend, depending on what you're into, but the movies are split up into 3 parts, and what I did, I was kind of at the last bit of the book, and I started watching the first 2 movies, and then when I finished the book, I watched the 3rd movie, so I had a little bit of overlap, and that means that I had a lot more to visualize while I was reading. There are, of course, differences in the movies versus the books. You know, it is Hollywood, so some things are, like, it does feel different. And out of the 13 dwarves, I mean, in this book, I really read them as, like, orky Gimli from the Lord of the Rings movie. Like, I was expecting that vibe, but then they cast 2 very handsome actors, or 3, in the Hobbit movies. So, like, Gilly, Fili, and Thorin are, like, actually kind of hot. Hollywood. They also added Legolas, and they added another character called Toriel. 2 elves, who aren't in The Hobbit, but they're in the movie. But I feel like they really connected the movies together really well in that way. And then I watched all of the behind the scenes, the making of types of videos that are on Peter Jackson's YouTube channel, which was also great. So I got to spend the entire month completely immersed in The Hobbit. I know that there's a lot of controversy and different opinions on the use of CGI in the movies and the rushed production and the blah 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 blah. But I still think that they did a freaking amazing job. I cannot imagine the pressure that Peter Jackson must have been under. And yeah, I just thought it was really cool to watch, and I love that they made all those behind the scenes stuff. I always love a behind the scenes, but the size of this production had me with my jaw on the floor the entire time. So I highly recommend even just watching the movies if you're not into reading, and also watching the behind the scenes. I can't wait to get like an extended DVD box set of all the, like, the whole thing and everything, extended versions and stuff, just because I've become the hugest nerd. Which brings me to my next thing. I'm not going to get into this too much, but I did in the meantime, like I said, in the start of November, finish The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, and I annotated it, and I loved it. I'm finding it really hard not to talk about, but I just want to save this for my November book reviews, you know. But that is why I do feel like I can say that I recommend starting with The Hobbit and then starting The Lord of the Rings, because there is so much reference to Bilbo and his adventure. If you don't know, Bilbo is Frodo's uncle, and Frodo is the main character in The Lord of the Rings. So there's a lot of overlap. And also, if you're new to the whole world, or you have never even heard of The Hobbit, but you have vaguely heard of The Lord of the Rings, Bilbo is the one who finds the ring, and that happens in The Hobbit. So, yeah, for all those reasons, I would start with this, because you just get the background story. You know so much going into it. You're familiar with the world. And then you get here, and then there's Aragorn. Anyway, characteristics. There are languages in this, which is a whole thing of itself. I just had the best time, and I fully understand the hype. I want to be part of the fan community. I mean, I've always known this, but now I realize it more and more. The memes and everything around Lord of the Rings, the whole community, they're so funny. They're so funny. It's amazing. So I've been enjoying that. I kind of go on Pinterest to look at memes sometimes because I don't have Instagram anymore, and if I want to get my fix of specific jokes, I go on Pinterest. And it works for me. Yeah, it's just been so incredibly fun to be in this world, and actually I had a great time just reading this the past month because, you know, with feeling really bad mentally and physically, it was the perfect escapism. It was the perfect little hobbit hole to fall into. I wanted to say rabbit hole, but yeah, it is incredibly immersive, and I could not recommend it more if you want to give it a go. I feel like if you are into fantasy already and you just haven't gotten around to this, get into this. It is amazing. I will say the writing in The Fellowship of the Ring is of course very different compared to The Hobbit. It, for me, reads more comparable to a classic, which for me is always a little bit more effortful. Like, it takes a little bit more effort to read it, a little bit more brain power, but in general, I wanted to be awake and immersed in the story, so I wanted to feel good and energized when I was reading this. So, yeah, that's just my tips, my take on all that. I'm now reading a couple other things, or I'm planning on reading a couple other things. My current read is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sengu Montana, which is a huge contrast to what I've been reading before, but it's nice to just read something else, fun, cozy, not as high stakes, you know. I made a TBR video on my vlog channel as well if you want to see that, but then recently also a viewer reached out to me who is an agent to an author, and she asked me if she could send me a book. So she sent me The Devouring by R.S. Cunningham, which is a horror, and I've never read a horror in my life, and I wasn't really planning on doing so, but I am intrigued, so I might pick this up somewhere this month as well, and hopefully read it in the shortest amount of time possible, because I do feel like I want to spend at least amount of time as possible in a horror world, but we'll see. And I have some other things that I want to get to before I start the Two Towers. What I also recommend, if you don't have access to the books or anything, but you have a Spotify subscription, you can listen to the audiobooks that are narrated by Andy Serkis, who is the actor who plays Gollum in the movies, and he's an incredible voice actor as well, and I loved alternating between reading and the audiobooks, especially when I had migraines or wasn't feeling too well and I still wanted to be in the world. I thought that made it a very fun experience, so I highly recommend the audiobooks as well if you don't want to read the physical books. And my light went out, and that was actually perfect timing because I'm done. I feel like I didn't even talk about the story as much as I thought I would, but I don't want to spoil it or anything, so just read the books and we'll talk about it later. If you